Hi there. Thank you for joining us for Wednesday experience of Women in the Bible. Please join me in prayer. Dear God, we give thanks as we join together to learn the lessons that are before us. God, we give thanks that we can see you and find you in every person, in every situation. Thank you, God. Amen. My name is Linda Redette, and it is my privilege to bring to you the story of Esther, one of the women from the Bible. Now, those of you who know me realize I do not usually work with notes. However, there is so much material that we're going to look at as we explore the lessons of Esther that I am, in fact, using notes. I hope that you will forgive me. So first of all, the book of Esther was almost left out of the Bible altogether. It's the only book in the Bible that never actually mentions God. So it was considered to be not quite religious enough. Another piece is the author of the book of Esther is unknown. The thought is that whoever wrote this book was probably an eyewitness to events, because the way it's written, it makes it seem like somebody was actually there. It has been thought that Mordecai himself had written the Bible, but the scholars who study such things thought, no, it was probably a younger Jewish man who actually wrote this story. So I am going to be reading from the book of Esther as we move forward. I'm using the New International Version of the Bible. If you have one, you can read with me. I will read you from some of the pieces that I've gathered for this viewing, and I will also be commenting on things as we go. So that's enough explanation. Let's get to it, shall we? So this is the Bible story of Esther. Queen Vashti defies the king. Let's read about that. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media. The princes and the nobles of all the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. Can you imagine that? 180 days of showing off his gold and his glory? When I read that, it really struck me as a lot until I thought about it. And in those days, travel was such a different venue than what it is today. And you know, the princes and the nobles would have brought with them their entire households and their guards, and it would have taken them perhaps that long to even get there. And perhaps during that 180 days, more and more were arriving to be shown through the castle, through the kingdom. When those days were over, the king gave a banquet. The banquet lasted 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of purple material and silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of marble, mother of pearl, and costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different than the other. The royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's generosity. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. So that kind of sets the stage for the queen's defiance. Everybody had been drinking for a week, as much as they could drink, and she gets ordered to show up before the king. Let's see how that works out. On the seventh day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and the nobles, for she was indeed lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. The king became furious and burned with anger. Can you imagine? Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king and the 7 nobles of Persia. According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of the king that the eunuchs have taken to her. All of the people consulted, got together to think about what to do with the queen. I can't help but have a little sympathy for the queen herself, not wanting to be shown off after partying for 7 days, but that's just me. Then Memucan, one of the eunuchs, replied, in the presence of the king and the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes, for the king's conduct will become known to all women, so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded the queen Vashti be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, Persian and Median women of nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone who is better than she. Okay, I'm going to stop here and talk about this a little bit. So what we're hearing, of course, is peer pressure, right? If the king can't command his queen, then the nobles are going to have wives running all over the place telling them, no, no, and even the peasants won't be able to control their women. Again, we're looking at from today into a history that was much different than the life we have achieved today. And I really want to talk about this because as we get to know Queen Esther, and she's coming, we need to really be aware of how much power the king has over the queen, in fact, all of his people. This king does consult his I don't know, his special inner court to get advice on how to move forward. So we can't really see him as a tyrant. He was responding to the laws of the day. So let's go forward. I'm in Esther 1:20. When the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice. So the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in his own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler over his household, using his native tongue. Esther lived in ancient Persia about 100 years after Babylon captivity. Her Hebrew name was Hadadesh, which means myrtle. I mentioned that already. When Esther's parents died, the orphan child was adopted and raised by her older cousin, Malachi. To find his new queen, Xerxes hosted a royal beauty pageant, and Esther was chosen for her throne. Her cousin Mordecai became a minor official in the Persian government of Susa. Let's see how that happened. I'm in the book of Esther 2:5-11. Now, there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Among those taken captive with the king of Judah, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was quite beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Hegai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor immediately. He provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned her to 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Before a young woman's turn came to go in to King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. This is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So what I found interesting here was that he waited a whole year before having his beauty pageant, but also that special food was given to these women. And again, that's such a sign of the times. She was beautiful even on whatever it was she was eating. When she was fed up and taken care of and scented and pampered, she would have been so much more so, as would they all. It's quite an investment. Soon Mordecai uncovered a plot to assassinate the king. Let's read about that. Esther 3:1. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman's son, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him this honor. When the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it and to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay honor to him, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. So we see that it was actually Mordecai who inspired Haman to annihilate the Jewish people. That was information that was new to me as I read this book. And 3:8, if you're reading with me, I jumped, sorry. When Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people despised among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." I'm reading notes from another source. Haman devised a scheme to have every Jew in Persia killed. The king agreed to his plan to annihilate the Jewish people on a specific day. Meanwhile, Mordecai learned of the plot and shared it with Esther, who knew she could be put to death for approaching her husband, the king, without a summons. Mordecai challenged her with these famous words. This is from Esther 4:13 and 14. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, a relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Esther urged all of the Jews to fast and pray for deliverance. Then, risking her own life, brave young Esther approached the king with a request. Esther 5:1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood at the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne and hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. When the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of my kingdom, it will be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther, "Now, what is your petition? And it will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. So as I was researching this, I discovered that if the king had not held out the gold scepter, she would have been put to death. That was the price you paid for coming to the king if you hadn't been summoned. And at that point in time, Esther had not been summoned to see the king in over 30 days. So, to keep his interest and his good graces, she prepared 2 banquets celebrating him. So after Haman found out and went to the first banquet and found out there was a second banquet, he went home happy in high spirits. I'm in 5:9. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled again with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, calling together his friends and his wife. Haman boasted to them about his own vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he was elevated above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I am the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up reaching a height of 50 cubits and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Malachi had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendant answered, "Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man that the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought it was he himself. "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" he asked himself. So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe that the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through all the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" "Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything that you have recommended." So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Kind of rubbing salt in the wound of the king. Haman, isn't it? Afterwards, Mordecai returns to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet that Esther had prepared. I'm going to skip over some of this because I feel like I'm just reading the whole Bible to you. In this second banquet, Esther named Haman as the man she would see destroyed. She exposed herself as a Jew herself and asked that her people be saved. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Haman had his head cut off and put on the pike that was reserved for Mordecai. But Esther's story does not end there. Esther 8, 3-6. Esther, again pleased with the king, falling at his feet and weeping, she begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" In Esther 9, we find this. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, an edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities and all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them because the people of all other nationalities were afraid of them. And all the nobles of all the provinces, the satraps, the governors, the king's administrators helped the Jews. Because of fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all of their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who had hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? It will be given to you." Esther requested another day for the Jews to continue killing the people who had stood against them. At the end of the killing spree, there were over 1,000 dead. the Feast of Purim. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. This happened the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why royal Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day of giving presents to one another. So what are the metaphysics behind all that? That's really quite a story. And it turned out that Esther was not the fluff piece that I thought she was. I told you that it was over 1,000 who were killed, but it says here it was 75,000 people were killed by the Jews in their rampage. So I sought help from Truth Unity, which is one of my favorite resources, and Reverend Ed of Truth Unity tells us this. Esther is a beautiful story about holding to spiritual principles in the face of pressures to give in to worldly realities. Esther enjoys her regal life, but she never allows it to distract her from her spiritual identity and spiritual truth. She never falters in her belief that what is right is more important than what is expedient, and that good can be achieved without stooping to the confrontational level of fear-based evil. The story of Esther can be an example of the important lesson that staying spiritually centered does not require that we sacrifice the pleasures of the world, just that we keep our priorities clear. She enjoyed being queen and the life it allowed her to experience, but she never sacrificed her faith for the sake of practical expediency. Rather, she allowed her faith to guide her so that her earthly power was able to accomplish great spiritual good. You'll remember in the reading that Mordecai told Esther that if she did not help, there would be some other avenue. His faith was so strong that the Jewish people would be saved, that he told her, if you don't do this, the Jews will still be saved, but your life will be forfeit. That's a really powerful faith. The Metaphysical Bible Dictionary tells us the meaning of Esther. Esther means star, the planet Venus, happiness and good fortune. Metaphysically, Esther is the dissolving power of spiritual love. This is an antidote for a dictatorial will. Queen Esther and all her relatives, the Jews, representing spiritual thoughts, join her in a fast. This means that we must deny all selfish desires of our love before we use it in softening the imperious will. When the consciousness of love stands in the inner court of our being, we cannot help acceding to its demands. Unselfish love is fearless because of its forgetfulness of self. Will divides its dominion with love when approached in the right attitude, which is by touching the highest point of understanding, the top of the golden scepter. Understanding of divine law is one necessary thing in all permanent unions. We know the truth. When we know the truth, we all are one, and there is no separation whatsoever. Thank you so much for joining me today for the story of Esther. I hope that you enjoyed it and perhaps learned to see Esther through a different lens. If you did enjoy this video, please feel free to share it with your friends. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Please join me in prayer. Father, Mother God, we rejoice in knowing that we are all one. We rejoice in knowing that our faith is stronger than the appearances of the world around us. God, we give all glory to you, and so it is. Amen.
Overwhelmed, but I won't break. Through the battle I will say, your grace will be enough. Your grace will be enough. Under fire, but we won't fall. We will never be alone. You'll always be enough. You'll always be enough. Now in God we trust. In his name we hope, and I know God will not be shaken. God is here with us. He's already won, and I know God will not be shaken. We will follow where you go. We will trust through the unknown. I know you go before. I know you go before. Lead my heart now in your ways, for we're carrying your name. Your promise never fails. Your promise never fails. Now in God we trust. In his name we hope, and I know God will not be shaken. God is here with us. He's already won, and I know God will not be shaken. You finish what you began, forever strong in your love. Your name is sure, and you'll fight for